I had achieved everything I had wanted, right? So I had an amazing title. I had a super successful career. I was really making a ton of money. And I got there and realized, thinking that that was it, and realizing, oh my goodness, it's not. And so I got really burnt out. This idea that money is a taboo topic spans many cultures. And so because of that, it's not a topic that we talk about freely. And because of that, we have certain associations with money that are negative, right? Whether you are poor or whether you come from money, everyone has negative associations and connotations with them. I've had conversations with people who are very much anti-capitalist. And they're like, we want to help, we want to be able to address the unfairness, but how do I do that? And the thing is that you have to learn how to also play the game, right? And so you might be anti-capitalist, and I understand that and I respect that. But the thing is using it as a tool for you, right? And so the more that we can talk about it and start to create change just by having conversations, we start to all take a piece of that really belongs to us.
Welcome to New World in the Making. Today's guest is Julie. She spent over 20 years in the corporate world of beauty and cosmetics, building a very successful career in a fast-paced and high-pressure industry. But after 2 decades, Julie opened actually a door to an entirely new chapter. She became a hypnotherapist. What's even more fascinating is the focus she's chosen for her work: money. A topic that touches every part of our lives, yet remains one of the least explored when it comes to how we actually relate to it, both personally and collectively. This felt like the perfect way to open this podcast, because money represents one of the deepest foundations of the systems we live in. And yet we rarely pause to explore the relationship we have with it. And that's exactly what we begin to do here. In this conversation, we unpack the deeply ingrained beliefs many of us hold about money and how we begin to reshape them. In the end, money is part of all of our stories, and in some way, the beginning for a lot to come. So welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining, Julie. I'm very grateful for you to be here. We have a lot of topics to talk about today, but we can maybe start with a little bit of your background. How have you come to the place that you're in now? Maybe let's start with that.
Okay. How have I come to the place where I am now? Wow. It's a bit of a loaded question, to be honest, because it depends on how much time we have. I could talk for the full 2 hours on my journey. However, what I would say is where I am now in this moment, working as a clinical hypnotherapist, focusing on a niche of money and wealth when it comes to everyone, but really on women. How have I gotten to where I'm at now? So I would say that it actually, well, I like to say now that it starts from the inside out, but actually I started from the outside in, right? So for so much of my life, for over 40 years of my life, I was living from a place of where I wanted to be perceived based on my background and my experiences. And so I was living from that place, doing things in a way of how I wanted to be received in the world. And so that was my entire journey, was living this life through a lens of what I needed to achieve, what I needed to accomplish, what success looked like. And so, yeah, living from a place externally, right? From a place of how I wanted to be perceived and what I thought I needed to do to be accepted in the world. So my successes, my accomplishments, always needing to feel busy and responding to people in a way that I thought was the answer that they wanted, right? And for so much of my life, I lived from that space until I got to a point where I was burnt out in my career. I was really unhappy. I was frustrated, and I really had to start over almost. And so what I would say is that's when I started to work on myself. Well, that's when I started to, because I was at a place where I left my career, right? I didn't know who I was anymore because that was so much of what I was tied myself to. I moved to a country where I didn't know anybody, and my relationship of almost 10 years ended. And so I really needed to find myself again. And never having done any work on myself, I decided that that was where I needed to begin again. And so I started exploring what that looked like, what therapy looked like, really starting to work from the inside out and understanding my patterns and my behaviors and why I operated the way I was, and starting to really unlearn all the conditioning. And so it's really interesting because I spent 20 years in corporate working in luxury cosmetics. And so it was really focused on, funny enough, external, right? External
Yeah.
things. I really, yeah, it's so funny how things work, right? Like unconsciously that you land into this career that really is all about how you look on the outside. And I got to a place in my life where I had achieved everything I had wanted. So I had an amazing title. I had a super successful career. I was really making a ton of money. And I got there and realized, thinking that that was it, and realizing, oh my goodness, it's not. And so I got really burnt out. And really what happened was when I started to do the work on myself, I realized it's because I was holding so much of myself back. I wasn't expressing myself. I wasn't sharing my concerns and my frustrations. I wasn't asking for help. I I really suffered alone in that silence and didn't know how to trust my intuition because I had suppressed it for so long. And so that was what brought me basically to the work that I do now, because I started doing work on myself, entering through hypnotherapy, funny enough, and exploring lots of different modalities, and really ultimately landing on, it always starts on the inside. And so the work I do now is helping others, because all the issues that we have, right? They're all manifestations of something that much deeper, something that's much deeper. So whether it is money or confidence or depression or anxiety or something that you want to kick, that you want to start, it all comes down to something that's much, much deeper at a subconscious level. And so when we start to work on that, we start to really transform our lives. And so the work that I do now comes from a place of my own personal experience.
Please support this podcast by subscribing. The more subscribers we have, the more we can grow and reach more people. You mentioned then the burnout happened, and then also your relationship ended, like everything came just at once, I feel. Was there any pivotal moment for you to just really go on that search? Maybe what brought you to end your corporate career, maybe?
Yeah, it's interesting because I had always felt this sense of I would have something, a separate career in my life. Like I always knew that this corporate career wasn't going to be the end all be all for me. There was something in me that always knew that there would be another part of my story. I just didn't know what that looked like and what that meant. And I never really explored that, to be honest. I figured it would happen when it would happen. But what ended up happening was that I was in such a toxic work culture and in a place where I wasn't able to express my own needs and ask for help, that I got so burnt out, I had to eventually leave. And so I decided just to quit and leave everything. And quitting, leaving everything, and at the same time, then moving countries, because I was based in China at the time, moving to Barcelona. I think the thing that really happened was all of it happening at the same time. Like the pivot that was forced was because I got burnt out, decided to leave, wanted to live abroad. So then took the opportunity to move at that time, but moving without needing to take a break, but so not knowing what was next, not knowing what I was going to do, coming for really a relationship that we had decided to move together. And when everything kind of crumbled, right, not knowing who I was anymore without that job, no longer having a relationship and being in a new country where I didn't know anybody because I moved just before COVID, right?
Wow.
So that really forced me to be like, what do I do now? And maybe I actually need help. And for the first time to actually seek it.
Beautiful. And why Barcelona?
I had always wanted to be in Europe. It was
Mhm.
something that I had always aspired to do. And I knew at some point in my life I would come. Barcelona was not the place I had envisioned, because for me, there's always been a connection to France, but this is where life led me. This is where my partner and I chose to stay, to land. And when we broke up and the relationship ended, I came back to my apartment after 4 months of spending time at home with family to recuperate and get back on my feet. I came back to my apartment in Barcelona, sitting by myself, wondering what was next and if I should stay or if I should pack up my things, go back to the US where my family was to reset and restart. And there was something in me for the first time that I listened and I was like, no, there's something that needs to be done here. There's something for me to do in Barcelona. And there was this energy and this voice that was coming to me. And I said, I need to stay. And yeah,
So powerful. Wow, that's beautiful. Have been talking about how much our families and our whole environment shapes us and our beliefs. How would you say that that environment in which you were growing up did that as well, and maybe also the American culture, but money and career, and you don't really ask how you're doing, right? The first thing that you ask someone in the US is being, what do you do? Can you explain a little bit more about this? Because I feel in Europe we do totally have that too, but maybe it's from a different perspective a little bit.
absolutely. I mean, so much of the experiences and the environment that we're in as children, it shapes and behaves who we become as adults, right? By default. And I come from a culture which I was born and raised in the US. So I have this very American culture, but I'm also Chinese ethnically. And so the combination of being Chinese and also living in the States was just like a double whammy, to be honest.
Sounds really
Because, you have this culture of the US that's very driven and ambitious and fast and innovative. And so there's that energy, right, of always needing to do and to be. And as you mentioned, right, when you meet someone for the first time, the first question that comes out is usually, well, what is it that you do? So much of what you do is tied to your identity, right? And this is very much like an American cultural society thing that I grew up in, compounded by the fact that I'm Chinese, right? And so from the day that you're born, or basically the day that you're conceived, right, your parents have expectations for you. And my parents are very traditional. They weren't raised in, right? They immigrated. So with these notions, these very traditional notions of how they wanted their children to be, what they expected of them, right? So of course, growing up, the things you always hear are very traditional, like you need to be a doctor, you need to be a lawyer. And it's very much ingrained from you at an early age. Plus the fact that my dad was a golden child and I was very much likened to my father growing up. It was always like, oh, you look like him. And it wasn't until I did a lot of work on my own that I realized that there was a lot of subconscious programming there, that because everyone had always commented on how much I looked like my father, that I somehow had this belief or wiring that I needed to also follow in his footsteps. And he basically came from a really poor background and studied and worked his way out of poverty, earning a scholarship that allowed him to move abroad, to the best school in Taiwan. And so he was always, from all my family members, whether it was my grandmother or, my aunts and uncles, like his cousins, extended family, everyone was always telling me about how bright and brilliant he was. So I was living under that shadow as well, of needing to be able to fill in his footsteps as also the oldest child, and also the traditional norms of Chinese culture plus Western society. And so for me, it was always this idea of, you need to be a good girl, you need to get good grades, you need to excel, and then you need to eventually become a doctor or a lawyer and do something that makes a lot of money and brings a lot of credibility to the family. So that was my early childhood programming, was
Right.
that.
And
Plus,
yeah,
on top of that,
yeah,
there's also this idea of feeling different. Right.
right.
So I grew up in a neighborhood that was very ethnically white and American. There was not a lot of ethnic diversity growing up. So it was, I would say, less than 1%. Right. And so as children, we often feel the need, and it's a survival skill that goes way back, right? To belong, to feel connected, to not want to be different, because being different meant you were unsafe.
Mhm.
And so because I looked different, because the language we spoke at home was different, I felt really different. And so on top of all that I just shared, right, there was this need to really want to fit in.
Yeah.
And so because of that, it was always from a very early age consciously programmed to be like, I need to act in a way that I fit in and belong and be accepted. So all of that contributed to the way I was.
So interesting. And do you recognize these patterns also now in your clients? Is there something that really comes up a lot as well?
Well, I think the interesting thing is after studying hypnotherapy, no matter the issues on the surface that you're dealing with and the challenges that you face, it always comes down to three beliefs, right? And it can be one of or combination of these. And it's this idea of, as a child, feeling that I'm not enough, that I am different, or that it's not available to me. And so at the end of the day, no matter the issue you have, it's likely boils down to one or three of these issues. And so for me, there was definitely this idea of feeling different and not being enough. So clients that come to me, it doesn't matter if it's about a money issue or if it's about, confidence or relationships or even physical manifestations in disease and illness. It somehow always boils down to one of these three root causes. And so it's so interesting how common it is, despite how it manifests at the surface.
Why do you think that is? What's happening there that we all have these three things there?
Well, it's the same thing I spoke about, right? As children, when we're born into this world, we have very basic needs that are common across the board. It's this need to feel safe, it's this need to feel connected, and it's this need to feel love. And when those things are wobbly or unstable, right, then we start to make interpretations or beliefs that that's not the case, that we don't have that, or it's not available to me, or I don't have it because I'm different.
Yeah.
So it really stems from that.
So interesting. I think we all can relate to that. And okay, so I mean, once you realize, okay, so this is not your path anymore, and you changed and started a new path, you decided to go into hypnotherapy, and in some way you decided to also focus especially on money. Can you maybe talk a little bit about why?
Sure, of course. So the interesting thing is, so I landed back on hypnotherapy because I realized that I want to help people. This is my dharma in this world, is to really help others. And I had to explore what that looked like and how, because there's so many ways in which that can happen. And I landed back on hypnotherapy because in my own experience, it helped me so much. And so when I first started, I was working, and I still do work with clients on multiple issues that range from everything that I spoke about and more.
Yeah.
But I landed on money because that was my mess. And I feel like oftentimes the things that we become really passionate about is because we have our own personal stories embedded in that. And it's things that we've overcome ourselves. And so for me, for the longest time in my life, money was something that I had a lot of shame and guilt around. And it took me a really long time. I was in my early 40s before I started to really not let that story become an excuse anymore and to take it into my own hands and do something about it. And so I started learning about what it was like to manage my money, to invest, to save. I started taking courses and reading lots of books and listening to podcasts and all the things. And once that happened, I felt I had more courage, right? To start to have conversations with people in my life about, how are you managing your money? What are you doing with it? Are you investing in all these different topics? And I realized throughout those conversations that, wow, so many of us have these similar emotions and sentiments and struggles around it, even though we might have different stories and different backgrounds and be in different situations. There's a common thread around this topic of money. And as I started to explore that more and more and have these conversations, there was something that resonated with me. I was like, okay, we need to start talking about this. We need to put this on the table. I want to be able to help people have these conversations. And so, yeah, that's kind of where it started. It's really just having initial conversations with friends in my life, realizing how impactful it was, because then that led them to transform their own relationships with money and do certain things and take certain steps. And so I realized and I start to think about, how do I take this topic of conversation and weave it into what I'm doing now, which is hypnotherapy. And so I realized that, mindset and behavior shapes everything in the actions that we take or don't take. And I started to really dive into money mindset, realizing that I could leverage hypnotherapy and help people work through money blocks. And I started, as I was exploring that, coming across a lot of different authors and this idea of financial therapy. And Morgan Housel, who is the author of Psychology of Money, he talks a lot about, you know, it's not just about what you know, but it's about how you behave. And so the reasons why we manage or don't manage how we view money is really linked to our money mindset. So, oftentimes people come to me and we see out in social media and a lot of news, it's this idea of, I know I should save, but I'm not. I know I should invest, but I'm not, or it's overwhelming. And so there's a lot of things that we know we should do, but the reasons why we're not doing them, right? What's the reason behind that? And so that's the work that I do, is working with people to overcome beliefs that were likely made and formed as children around money.
There's so much to unpack, so many questions. I have. Let's start with, why do you think money is such a big topic in our society? It's somehow everywhere, and at the same time, it's hidden away as well. We don't really talk about it, but it's all the time in the room. Then there's so many different relationships that people have with money, and it's just such a big topic that we barely even. Why would you say that is? And yeah, why is it such a big thing, and at the same time, it's hidden away?
So why this topic? And so to start from where you started, is money is a part of our everyday life, whether we realize it or not, right? Like we work for it, we spend it, and oftentimes it can be very emotional. It can be stressful. Stresses around money could result in lack of sleep. It can result in our nervous system being misaligned. It can result in issues with relationships, issues with yourself, with your career, so many things, right? It impacts us on so many levels. And I often think that we understand that it's a very emotional topic, and yet we actually never question our relationship with it. Like we just inherit the beliefs that maybe from our caregivers, from our parents, the adults around us, but we never actually sit and think about what is our relationship with money and why is it that way?
Yeah.
We just take it, I wouldn't say for granted, but we take it and it's just a part of us.
Mm-hmm.
Never sit to think about, why is it this way?
Yeah.
And can we change our relationship with it? Right? What are the things that we took on that we want to keep, and the things that we took on that we no longer need?
And what kind of beliefs do you see repeat themselves? What are the main beliefs, would you say?
Well, we'll get to the root in a second, because
Yes.
I think there is a common root,
Okay.
much like I had mentioned before.
Yes.
But oftentimes it can be so many different things in the way it shows up, right? And an interesting thing is that we might sometimes automatically think, oh, the people who have issues with money are the ones who come from poverty, that maybe were more marginalized communities. Not so much people who have money don't have issues, right? But the truth is that actually we all have stories with money. We all carry stories, and we all have certain beliefs around money that could be shaken, right? Whether you come from money or whether you don't. So I would say that's the first myth that I would say is not true, right? But it shows up in different ways. Like it shows up in terms of being able to charge your worth and ask for your value. So whether you're an entrepreneur running your own business, or you're, working in a corporate setting and being able to negotiate for your worth and your value. So salary, it comes to your spending habits, or people who, for example, I have many clients who overwork, and won't invest and spend in themselves or take care of themselves. So there's that aspect of it. I have other clients who aren't able to save at all or invest. They're always spending, right? They make enough and then they spend, they make enough and then spend, all the stories and patterns behind that, and there's other people who just constantly want to give all the time, and not ask. I guess it goes back to their value, right? Asking for their worth. And so there's a lot of different stories, and it can show up in so many different ways. But at the end of the day, what I've started to realize, and when we talk about the three root causes and the beliefs, is that self-worth is really tied to your financial patterns. And so your ability to ask for what you deserve comes back to your belief in yourself. Your ability to work really hard and make a ton of money, but then never spend it or feel guilty for spending it, comes back to how you feel about you and investing in yourself. Your ability to stop giving away everything for free or to give discounts comes back to, do I value the work and the impact I'm making?
Right.
Right. And so at the end of the day, what I'm finding in all the work that I'm doing is that it comes back to self-worth. Even when you are successful and super accomplished, and you've making a certain income level, and you want to break through to that next income level, the same thing can happen, right? You might hit another block to be able to break through. And again, it comes back to, is it safe to receive? So there's a lot of fear when it comes to money and allowing money to feel safe and that you're safe to hold it. You're safe to receive it because money's energy at the end of the day, right? It comes in and out. And are you allowing it to flow in and out in your life? Is there a block somewhere?
So beautiful and such an interesting perspective as well. Again, so many questions. I feel like there's a lot of questions sometimes around money being good, bad. Question like, why me? Why are others not having the same possibilities as I do, right? Why should I receive more money if there are other people not receiving enough, even to really sustain a normal, comfortable life? How do you navigate that tension? And yeah, what kind of answers do you have there?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is that money inherently isn't good or bad. It's how we perceive it and the way we look at it. And you wrote about this actually in your article, right? I love the analogy you use that money is like a hammer, right? It's a tool. And it's not about the tool itself, but it's about the person that's wielding that tool. And so it's the same way I see it, right? It's money is a tool, but we're not taught or educated about that, right? And this goes back to your question earlier about this silence around money and why is that? And it's a systemic thing, right? Again, this you write about this is that the systems in which we're brought up and how we're educated. What I would say is that it's not just a one culture thing, right? This idea that money is a taboo topic spans many cultures. And so because of that, it's not a topic that we talk about freely. And because of that, we have certain associations with money that are negative, right?
Right.
Whether you are poor or whether you come from money, everyone has negative associations and connotations with that. Because maybe if you have money, there might be a tendency to think people may want me for the money, or people may look badly at me because of I have money. And there's maybe sometimes greed and negative associations attached to that. Whereas if you're poor, it's like you can be stuck in this cycle and it's hard to get out of it. Right? And then money is seen as evil. And so what are those stories that we're building around that? And again, we don't often take a look at where we are today in relation to that, right? And what our relationship is with money and how we view it and where that comes from. And so we just get caught up in these stories where oftentimes we feel alone in that. We don't talk about it. And the interesting thing is that there's a statistic that was done. They said 62% of people, so 6 out of 10 people, more or less, avoid the conversation of money altogether,
Wow.
whether it's with family or friends or even with their partners, that people would rather talk about politics or even death over money.
Wow.
That's how ingrained
Mm-hmm.
the culture and the system that
Yeah.
we live in is, right? But the thing is that we are all feeling very similar feelings around money and emotions, no matter what our backgrounds are. And so when we start to open that up and start to find resonance in this conversation, right? There's a lot more empowerment that happens. And so Brene Brown always talks about shame. And she says that in secrecy, shame thrives and it grows. So when we don't talk about it, the shame and the guilt that we have around money, whatever it is, it only feels bigger, right? And more exaggerated. But when we start to put it in the open, it starts to dissolve and disappear. And when we start to talk about it, it expands our possibilities of what that can look like because then everyone comes to the table and shares their stories, especially in the spaces that I've been creating. It's beautiful to witness when one woman shares their story, another one then riffs off of that, and then someone else shares their story. And then we feel connected despite our backgrounds and our upbringings and our experiences. There's some kind of connection and magic that happens when we start to talk about it, and then you don't feel as alone and you feel more motivated to perhaps explore and take that next step.
That's very beautiful and very powerful to just open up that shame, right? And suddenly you stay way more in your truth. It's super impactful. I wanted to ask you, what do you think? Because now with all the shifts happening as well, we still have that narrative, right? So just work hard and then you're gonna be able to earn. If you work hard, you're going to be able to receive something in return. But I feel that is shifting now. We are not even seeing that happening really. I feel, especially our generation now, it's been super disappointed and just, okay, I've put in the hard work and still it's not working. What is happening? How is everything still getting more expensive? What is going on? I can't afford, the house, the car, building a family, really, multiple jobs. I don't know, just like suddenly there's this tension here and the narrative is not working anymore. At the same time, we are perceived as lazy or even just privileged to look for, well, it's just about the purpose. It's just about what do I want to do with my life. It's the work ethos has changed a bit. Work life balance. These things. How I don't know, how do you relate to all that?
I would say that I obviously can't speak for everybody. I can only speak from my own personal experience. And depending on where you are in your life, it's true that there is very much still a struggle depending on where you are, especially if you're on one end of that ladder. What I would say is this ethic of, working hard and you'll reap the rewards of that is such BS that we were sold, to be honest. And I know that from personal experience, both for myself and my father, honestly, because even as you're speaking, the things that are going through my mind, and I'll just start there, is yes, it works, at least when I was younger, to a certain extent, right? Maybe when you're a child and you're studying, if you're studying and you're doing your homework and you're really putting the effort, then perhaps you'll get the good grades and the good marks, right? But once you get past that and you become an adult in this world, and as it relates to money and earning and being able to be independent and provide for yourself, I've realized, especially working in corporate, is that at some point that stops, right? It's not just about how work and hoping that someone will be able to see you. It's the ability to also be able to speak up for yourself, to use your voice, to say, here's what I'm doing. And the higher up you go, the more important that is in terms of being able to navigate politically, to be able to develop communication skills, to be able to um, own your value, be able to say to the right people, network and build social capital, and say, here's what I'm doing and here's what I've done, or here's what I've accomplished. And if you don't do that and that's not part of the equation, then the reality is you only can get so far.
Wow.
And that was my own story as well, right? Which is where I perhaps wouldn't have gotten burnt out if I was able to speak for myself, able to express my needs and my wants and my frustrations, right? And so within the organization, but also reaching out to mentors and saying, like, I'm actually really struggling here, or even peers, right?
Yeah.
And so I would say that's the first piece in terms of thinking this idea of working hard and being able to then get where you are is such BS, right? The other part of that equation is that we're not ever taught to make our money work for us, right? Many of us aren't taught that, or around that to be able to understand how that even works, right? The idea of, how do I invest in my money and how do I make my money work for me when I was earning a six-figure salary? My goodness, right? And thank goodness I am comfortable, right? And I speak from a place that I know how fortunate I am, and not everybody is in that situation, right? So again, I'm speaking to from my own experience, where not everyone can actually also resonate, able to take time to find the balance, right? Because balance is going to look different for everybody, and also in every season in your life. But what I would say is that the earlier we can start to understand how to make our money work for us and the different ways of also making money, I think the better off everyone will be. Because it's not just about working a day job and making that minimum wage or whatever that salary looks like, and then saving it. Because even saving it, as you know, because of inflation, you're actually losing.
Yeah.
And so those conversations around what is actually making money look like, from whether it's a day job or other means of income, and passive or even active income streams, those conversations don't happen.
It's so interesting. We are never really taught about money. We don't have any idea really how actually the whole system works. I mean, it was even a surprise to me that even studying sustainability we never talked about money. You see the balance sheet and all that, but you never really talk about, okay, so, but how is the system really working? Like how does money work? That's why this conversation is just so important to me to have. I mean, the whole world is moving due to money. So at the end of the day, a business needs to make money. It needs to have a profit. We need to survive and, yeah, eat bread. And for that, we need money. And, it's just so good to just start talking about this. I feel there's a big thing also with feeling responsibility. What if money comes? I have a responsibility. What do I do with it? Right. And since we haven't been taught, we don't know what to do with it. It's like this. Oh, now I might be at the table, at the big table, and now I need to decide where I put my money in. How do you see that responsibility, especially within the world that we are living in right now? You know, um, how do you relate to that responsibility? Um, do you feel that responsibility? Your clients, they may be afraid of even having that responsibility. And then what do they do with that?
I would say it all comes down to first identifying what are your values,
Mhm.
right? Because everyone has different aspirations and goals in their life and what brings them joy. And so I think money, going back to money being a tool, money is a tool for you to live your values. Money is a tool for you to be able to live your purpose.
Right.
Right. To invest in yourself and your communities, in the projects that you care about. So I think that's the first thing that I invite people to ask themselves and to explore, because then that determines what you do with your money. What are your time horizons? Are there certain projects that you want to invest in now, or are you more concerned about your future when you retire? And so how old are you? And that plays into it as well, right?
Sure.
And how much time you have to be able to do certain things. And so I would say it really depends on the individual. There's no one size fits all answer, right? Oftentimes growing up, we used to hear, oh, buying a home is the safest investment. But that's actually not the case. And I didn't learn that until maybe 5 years ago, right? And so, because again, coming from a Chinese American background where
Mhm.
you're immigrating to a country, home is safety. And if you own your home, there is a feeling and a sense of security that gives. And so that can be really important if that's what your goal is. But if you're looking to invest in property for the sake of investment, then rent it out. Don't live in it. Right. And there's all the different calculations that you can do. But the thing is that it depends again on what you value and what's important to you. And so I would say that again, diversification is really smart. So once you understand what it looks like to be able to have different things that you're looking at and not putting all your eggs in one basket. But again, it really depends on where you're at. But there are obviously different types of investment funds that can work depending on what your goals are, right? In terms of time horizon, in terms of returns. And so there's lots of different options. It just really, the first and foremost, most important thing is to understand, where you're at and what's important to you and what it is that you want to do.
And I think one thing that shocked me was to understand how powerless we are in terms of the money creation, how much money printing and the inflation and all that was having such a huge impact on our daily lives, right? And suddenly what you were saying, right, about if we save money and then the governments decide to just print more money, then suddenly we are losing the value of the money that we've saved, right? So just little by little, maybe we don't even really realize that much. Um, but this stress and fear maybe even more ingrained. I need to do something with my money because otherwise it's going to lose value. And let's just short-term thinking. This boom, boom, boom. Um, do you feel there's feeling of I'm not powerful enough to just do something about this? Is it something that maybe clients would come to you with? Is there something related to that maybe?
Again, I think it ties back to what I mentioned about self-worth, right? Like deep down, how do we feel about ourselves? Because self-worth is how you see yourself and how you feel about yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, part of it is am I worthy enough to be able to receive that money? Am I worthy enough to make that much? And am I safe to hold it and to do good things with it? Will I remain a good person when
Mhm.
I come into money and wealth? Right.
Yes.
Am I So I think there's a lot of those type of mental
Yeah.
mindset blocks that
Yeah.
prevent us sometimes from taking that next step, even though we know we, you know, should be doing certain things. And I don't like the word should, but, for lack of a better word.
Okay. And how do you see injustice in this system? How do you explain that we still, because yes, it's about me wanting and allowing money to come, right? And not just on a personal level, but maybe also on a systemic level. But how do we still have moments, societies, people where that is not flowing their way? How's that imbalance still possible? And you know what I mean? Maybe you can help me because I honestly don't know how to put them both together and make sense of it.
Yeah. I mean, again, I go back to this idea of that it starts from within.
Yeah.
You have to start from within to be able to then create the internal ripple that starts is what creates the change outside.
Right.
Right. And so what I would say is that, for example, I had to go through my own personal struggles and journey to be able to understand and then integrate this into the work that I do. So my mission now, my very first, I have three missions, really three mission statements, my why. But the first thing is really to be able to touch and reach as many people as possible
Mm-hmm.
on this topic because of the way that society has conditioned us to not talk about it. It's created a lot of this suppression, lack of awareness and education, right?
Right.
The more we talk about it, the more people that we can impact and start to educate
Right.
so that where we feel injustice and unfairness, we can start to really radicalize and change that, right? And
Mm.
it starts from us,
Right.
right? Having that intention and in our own way, trying to address it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the first thing is that the reason why I offer so many free talks and workshops is because I want to just put the topic on the table.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people who come to these talks have never even had these conversations,
Right.
right? And so it's really starting to open that door for that to happen.
Right.
So I think that's really, for me, a place to start.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing too is, I've had conversations with people who are very much anti-capitalist and they're like, we want to help. We want to be able to address the unfairness, but how do I do that? And the thing is that you have to learn how to also play the game, right? And so you might be anti-capitalist and I understand that and I respect that. But the thing is using it as a tool for you, right? And so that's always going to be there, but it's always going to be there for everyone who has access and wants access to it.
Right.
And so how do I take my share, but take that piece and do with it something that's actually really meaningful and impactful for me?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the more silent we stay about it, it's just going to continue.
Right.
Right. And so the more that we can talk about it and start to create change just by having conversations. And so we start to all take a piece of that really belongs to us. And so what I would say is even before I started doing what led me to this work, to be honest, is individual conversations I started having with friends that then led to multiple people buying a house, which is what they wanted. And I'm not saying that this is, the end, this is the goal. It just happens to be what they wanted to do, right?
Right.
Someone starting a business, right? So different things, or someone started investing, right? But it had to start somewhere. And so for me, even having this conversation starts to create a ripple effect.
Right. Oh, I love this so much because also, and one word just came up while you were talking was how realistic is this? Because this is something that I've encountered a lot. This, I'm never going to be able to earn this or that, or crazy ideas, dreams. What's your relationship with realistic?
Well, I think oftentimes, I think it's healthy to dream and to have ambition and desire. And I think, again, it goes back to what's blocking me from feeling that it's not possible, right? Knowing that it doesn't happen overnight, that we have to take tiny steps in the right direction and that there might be setbacks and mistakes and failures, but that we'll learn from that as long as we're headed in the right direction, right? But not doing anything because of the fear of not being able to do it or that we're not worthy of it, I think that starts with understanding why that is. And I think so often in society, especially as women and marginalized communities, we hold ourselves back. because we're taught, right, oftentimes to be the good girl, to not express our emotions or to show our desires and what we really want. And so oftentimes that's what holds us back, right, from really stepping into our power, stepping into the ways that we can contribute and make impact into this world, right? That often holds us back. So it always comes back to that work and to that root cause of I've got something in me, like we all do, right? That is of value and that is worthy in this world. What is it that I can create? Right? It comes to purpose. And I have come more and more to realize that as humanity, our purpose in this world is to give back and to help each other. But what that looks like for each individual is going to be different. It could be simply, and and I don't mean it in this way, right? It could be that my task is to raise children and to put children into this world and to nurture them to become beautiful human beings and adults. It could be that I'm going to be the founder of a system or a company that's going to change lives. It could be what I'm doing in my work as a therapist, right? To help people overcome their blocks. So it could look like anything. And there's no right or wrong with that, what that looks like. But I do think that when we come back and try and figure out really what is our purpose in this lifetime as human beings, I somehow always comes back to that for me. So if we can align with that and figure out what that looks like for us and really step into and feel empowered and motivated um, to be able to do that without holding ourselves back, right? It would be incredible to see what would happen in this world. There's a woman who has a very successful cosmetic company in the US. She wrote a book, and in this book she writes, your self-worth is your ceiling.
Wow, that's powerful, huh?
Right. And so oftentimes we get in our own way.
Mhm.
And so when we think we have a certain ambition or we want to achieve a certain thing or we want to be able to have a lot of money, and then we don't take the steps to try and figure out how do we make that a reality, well, what's getting in your way?
Let me ask you, with AI, how do you feel we're gonna change this world, and specifically going into jobs? Do you think that a lot of jobs are gonna be lost, that we might be seeing a shift in work? And what if then suddenly we don't have so many salaries anymore? People don't have so much money anymore. What's your take on this? Because then also that could be a completely different scenario where things just get cheaper because everything gets more efficient. How do you see this shift evolving? What's happening here?
Yeah. I'm definitely not the expert as it relates to this, but what I will say is, and I tell my clients this a lot, but what you look for, you find, right?
Mm.
So if you're focused on the negative aspects of AI, right, that's what you're going to see. If you're focused on the opportunities it might bring, then that's what you'll see.
Mhm.
And we are, and you write about this, right, going through a big change and transformation. But AI, I'm sure we can find, and you would be probably a bit more, your expertise would be, how do I say this? You'd be able to write more about this than myself or speak more about this than myself. But it's just much like any other historical moment that we've had where there's been transformation, right? Yes, there will be, like with the industrial revolution, right? There will be jobs that will become redundant, but then new things will happen. And so I see that much with the similar, with, even also with the invention of the internet and what that's done for us. Right? So there's been a lot of, when we look back at history and all the evolutions that have taken place, yes, there will be displacements and there will be things that will be made redundant, but then also there's a lot of also possibility as well in that space. And so I think it's really how you look at it, to be honest.
Yeah. And I love the combination of us just talking about it so much that we are already taking the space, right? So what you're saying about let's spread the message, let's get the shame out there and open up to this. I love that, because this is from another perspective and from another angle, coming to the decentralization of money, right? I mean, one thing that, especially looking into the Bitcoin space, was triggering my curiosity. If we allow another currency to flourish, right, that is maybe decentralized and is not in the hands of just a few, and the understanding of Bitcoin opening up new doors because it could help things to actually get cheaper for a deflationary system to evolve. Could you see a world eventually where we don't need this anymore, where this tool of money is not required? Do you see that in any scenario?
I mean, to be honest, I haven't thought about it. So, no, I haven't. I mean, I think, again, what I would say about this is money started as a means of exchange, right? And so, again, it's a tool, right? And so, money in its current form, will it change? I don't know. But this idea that we have something as a form of exchange for our value, our products, our services, I think there will be a need for this somehow to always exist.
Mhm.
And it's just the idea of in what shape or form,
Right.
right? Um, yeah, I don't know so much, and I don't spend so much effort and energy on how it will evolve as much as how do we use what we have and what are our beliefs around this.
Yes. Yes. Yes, because I think also this is something that I talk a lot with my dad about as well, where it's just this accepting the system as it is and taking it all in, right? And then we can move from there.
I mean, and I would say on that point, again, it's the things that you value and the tools that you have. So there are certain tools that speak to you, whether that is tools to invest, tools to, because of how you feel about Bitcoin, whatever that looks like, right? You being the platform to be able to use your voice to share that with others as well.
Yeah, for sure. How do
Yeah.
you personally see right now the transformation that we are going through, all that change? There's a lot of noise right now. Maybe you're seeing more and more clients go through a shift. And how does that relate to the systemic change? Is that something that you can relate to right now?
I would say that we need this work more than ever.
Right.
And it's not something I think more and more we're becoming more open to it. And at the same time, we need it more than ever because of all the noise that's happening. And because of all the noise that's happening, our systems, our nervous systems are so dysregulated.
Yeah.
And the more dysregulated they are, the easier it is for us to conform.
Right.
And so that's why the work that I do and the work of many others who do similar work is so important, because when we are able to tune into ourselves and we understand our worth and our value and what it is that we're supposed to do in this world, and we can align our nervous systems to be in, to work in that way, that's when we can, I think, that's when we can make an impact. And so when we're caught up in all that noise, it becomes really hard to focus. And so for me, I actually struggled for some time because I love reading the news and I love economy and reading about politics and what's happening in the world. But because of recent events and me living so far away from the US, I actually had to unsubscribe from all my news channels. And it was something that I actually initially felt a lot of guilt about because I felt like it's my responsibility to stay on top of what's happening in the world. And for so much of my life, it was also part of my job, working in corporate and being able to understand what's happening geopolitically and how it affected our business was really important. And so for me to make that decision to pause all my subscriptions was actually a really difficult thing to do. But I did it because I needed to make sure that I was centered enough to do what I had to do in this world. And it was only after speaking with a nervous system coach, she was able to put the words that I was around what I wasn't able to articulate, right? And Jen, who's the founder of Biosomatic, which is a nervous system reset method, was saying to me that, again, exactly what I just mentioned, when our nervous systems are dysregulated, it is more likely that we will conform. Right. And so when our nervous systems, when we give ourselves the space to reset our nervous systems, when they are in alignment with us, we can make decisions from a better place. And so my decision to do that actually was exactly that. And I felt that like all the important things that would come through to me anyway would still get filtered, would still find their way to me all the things that were happening in the world, right? But because there is so much noise, I needed a way to distance myself from that and not spend myself spiraling about, is this actually just noise or is this the reality and this is fact and what do I do with this information? And so it's allowed me to focus on my work and what I meant to bring and birth into the world. And so at the moment, I am a bit disconnected from social media outlets or news outlets because for that precise reason. And yeah.
That's, I think, also something beautiful and brave and important that we are connected, right?
Yeah.
So thanks for doing that, so that we all the others can also follow.
Yeah, it's just because there's so much work for us to do in this world, and it's not to say that we need to disconnect and that's not important what's happening. It is what's happening out there is very important. But for me specifically in the work that I'm doing and the necessity for me to actually focus and hone my intention on creating what I'm meant to create at the moment right now, it doesn't mean that it's a forever thing, right? It just at the moment right now, I just need to focus. And that's
And I think you said it also in our last conversation that you're still hearing everything that's important. The real important stuff really comes through, no matter if you're not reading every day all the news, right? It's just the important stuff. For sure, you're gonna know about that.
well, because I was reading, I was pouring in. The first thing I would do in the morning was read, all my every headline for all my subscriptions and just get into all the nitty gritty of things and then just start to spin. And it
Right.
wasn't helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I would like to know a little bit more about how does hypnotherapy work in terms of what's happening there, because I've experienced it just in a group session, but I've
Uh-huh.
experienced it and it was very eye-opening. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how it actually works.
So yeah, hypnosis really just helps to induce anyone into a really relaxed state of mind. So much so that it allows your subconscious mind to come forward and your conscious mind to take a back seat. Because our conscious mind is actually in reality driving only 5% of our actions or behaviors or habits. Everything's actually happening at the subconscious level. And so getting to access the subconscious mind through hypnosis is really kind of the unlock, right? To getting to the root of your issues. And so I use hypnosis in hypnotherapy as a way to access the subconscious mind. Because the thing is, the subconscious mind has been on record since our inception. It's kind of like a data bank of all your memories, all your experiences of everything that's ever happened to you since you were a child or a baby in the womb. Right. And so yeah, the subconscious mind, it's captured all these memories and these experiences and this beliefs. But what's more important is it's the interpretation that it holds.
Oh my God, yeah,
Right.
this is great. Yeah.
So oftentimes what happens is that we experience certain things as children, but then we interpret them from a child's perspective. And that's what gets wired into the subconscious mind, because the subconscious mind, it never sleeps. It's always on. Right. And so to be able to get to the root of why you have an issue that you have, it's going back to the root, right? Because as I mentioned, everything that we want, the struggles that we have, the challenges that we face in life, they're all manifestations of something that's much deeper, likely a limiting belief that we created in our childhood, right? That's stored in our subconscious mind. And so hypnosis allows us to access the subconscious mind to be able to understand what were those experiences that shaped why we behave in certain ways. And so once you're in hypnosis, I use hypnotherapy, and I was trained by Marissa Peer in a method called rapid transformational therapy. And so she basically had studied for over 30 years doing multiple things. And so her method that I've learned and use is basically at the root of it, different tools like NLP and CBT and Gestalt and even internal family systems. And so once I have the client in hypnosis, I use different tools that are very traditional psychotherapy tools or inspired by traditional psychotherapy tools to navigate, right? Because it's about understanding what happened and then being able to see the child that I was made that interpretation or made that belief, but I'm an adult now and I don't need to hold on to that belief anymore. I can understand it. I can reframe it. And so it's about reframing in the session using the different tools and techniques so that you can come out of it feeling different, feeling lighter with a different understanding, right? And the way like just neuroplasticity works, it's about reinforcing that wiring, right? It's like every habit you want to change takes time to build a muscle to strengthen. And so the work that we do continues on, right, with recordings to continue to wire in that change.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And does the subconscious from those past generations influence in there? Is there something that could be related to all your heritage maybe?
So there's multiple ways to answer to answer this, but coming from the subconscious mind itself, right?
Mhm.
What I would say is that it picks up anything and everything that we had exposure to or experienced. So in terms of generational things, part of those experiences could be the things that we heard from our grandparents or from elderly, aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles. And so, or things that your parents heard that they passed down to you. So absolutely there's generational things that get passed on within that. I won't go into past life things because there's also a lot of evolutionary things that can happen as a result of that, right? But if we stay just specifically on
Yeah.
the subconscious mind, oftentimes what we hear from our parents was passed on from their parents and their parents,
Right.
right? And so a lot of that is very much ingrained and
Mhm.
comes generationally, right? So I worked with a client, for example, on money issues, and she said to me, all the women in my family had issues with money. Every single one of them. Her mother, her aunts, her grandmother, right? And so until she worked on it, she was able to then break that chain, but she had to understand why that was. And so we
Right.
inherit a lot of these things as well.
I guess also money is such a powerful tool for us women to kind of break free from past stories that we inherited, no? The social idea of being less in society in a way as well, right? So is there something that you can see as a pattern as a woman in your clients?
I mean, for sure, the reason why I focus a lot more on women and women plus is because just if you look at the historical figures and facts, women in the US and in the UK, for example, didn't have access to their own bank accounts in their name until the 1970s. So it's been less than 100 years.
Wow.
Up until that point, you could only have access to money through marriage. And
We've come a long way, huh?
you wonder, and we still have so far to go because you wonder why women feel the way they feel about money,
Yeah,
right?
of course. It's very healing to know. Yeah.
And so it's also a nice thing to share because it makes you feel, okay, it's not just me.
Right.
I'm not the only one that feels behind because in fact, historically, right, it's quite new for us to be able to have access to our own money, right? To be able to have just the access and then to have to learn about how to manage it and how to make it work for you and to invest in all these different things.
Yeah.
Very new conversation. And actually, and then when we talk about for everyone, right? Things like even funds, ETFs, those didn't even exist also until I think it was like the 1980s, right?
Uh,
And so this conversation is not an old conversation in terms of how to make your money work for you, the different things you can do. It's quite new.
yeah, that is quite revealing as well.
Yeah. 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 And so it's interesting too, because the more that I've explored this in this conversation and I love to read and I'm always looking at different books, especially ones that use female voices. I've realized that in the last 10 years, there's been a surge of women in this space, writing books, creating platforms for investing. And it's been really a beautiful thing to witness, right? That more people are coming into this space and that there's enough room for everyone to be heard because everyone has their spin on things, their way to explain and educate. And so I love what I'm seeing in this space.
Yeah, I mean, in sustainability, when we studied impact investing, it's for sure more women led area, um, which also makes it a very important topic to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
What questions are you sitting with lately? What are questions that are coming up low?
Hmm. Yeah. So what questions am I sitting with recently? I would say the first thing I'm thinking about a lot is because we talked a lot about also the transformation that's happening, what's happening geopolitically, historically, and socially. And so I think like while it's important to understand the macro context, what I've been sitting with a lot recently is what is my role in that? And but a role that feels in alignment for me, dictated by society and by
Right.
the conditioning that
So
we
powerful. Like,
and so and what I mean to give very specific, like tangible examples is again coming from in between of having to check with myself because sometimes I catch myself and I'm like, oh, I should be doing more. Why am I not there yet? But then I take a step back and I look at all the things that are happening for me and I realize, oh no, I'm actually okay.
yeah.
Again, coming back to this idea of working at a pace and a rhythm that works for me.
Hmm.
And again, I speak from a place where I have the luxury to also be able to do that. Right. But I think, and what I invite people to do is working within your own context and situation about where can I strike a balance, tuning into myself and working at my pace in a way that works with where I'm at, right? Because maybe if you're working in a corporate setting, then it can be a bit more difficult because there's certain expectations and guidelines that you have to work within, right? But can you take moments for yourself where you just pause and reflect and just calibrate? And so I sit with this a lot. And this is the question that I'm trying to pose to people as well, because I don't think that we were taught this. I definitely wasn't.
Yeah.
And I'm still fighting against oftentimes this default wiring that I've been conditioned to be.
Right.
And so trying to live from that place.
And quick question there. How do you try to do that? How do you try to mm, fight back that ingrained?
I think it's the first thing is catching yourself, right? When those questions pop up and it's like this feeling of not being good enough or feeling imposter, it's like taking a moment to be like, okay, well, why do I feel that way? And is that actually true?
Yeah.
You know? And I've gotten really a lot better. I wouldn't say I'm perfect for sure, but I've gotten a lot better at listening to those small little like voices or those small little nudges to check in and figure out, okay, what's happening in my head and my heart.
So powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like gaining awareness of it, right?
Mhm.
First. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So I would say that that for me is something that I'm really sitting with, and also being okay to speak about it. Cause I think for me, I realized, okay, this is working for me, but do I have the courage to actually put this out there?
I feel you.
Yeah. Especially and also depending on where that lands, right? Because maybe I feel safer to do that here in Barcelona or in Europe where culturally it's a little bit different, right? Versus in the US and the world that I came from, which I have done. It took me the courage for me to do that, but I've done it because I feel like this is the work I'm here to do. And I
Yeah.
have to stand behind that, right? So yeah. So I would
And
say that's been a big piece of what I've been sitting with.
hmm
And the other thing I'd say to be very honest and transparent and a bit vulnerable is also to be, as I'm looking at what I'm building, and I understand that my impact, again, this goes back to the conversation we're having, right? About this vision and this ambition that we have. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to get there, but I know that my ambition is big. And I know that this topic of money and wealth is important. And so I'm trying to also figure out and navigate what does it actually really look like? And so exploring all the different avenues and partnerships and collaborations and building community for me and just taking all those steps. And I would say that again, all of this is happening because I'm in alignment. And so all of this is happening because there's a pull and not a push, which has been for me game changing,
mm,
right? To not feel like because oftentimes when you're pushing, at least for me, when I'm pushing and there's resistance, it's not only harder, but I also find that the results aren't often what I'm looking for.
Right.
And so when you are living from a place that is really aligned with what you're meant to do, things start to happen. And all the things that are happening for me are pools that I'm leaning into. And so I'm also exploring, okay, what does this all look like and how is this all going to shake out and shape out? But I'm also just trusting that I'm on that right path and it will eventually reveal itself, you know? But yeah, for me, it's this question of like wanting to make this really big, having the courage and confidence to take those actions in that step, but making sure it feels in alignment for me, you know? Because this work and these conversations that we're having are super important.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That is very powerful, and I'm so curious to see where this leads to.
Yeah. I would also say the other thing, just I'm going to have one more thing to
Yes,
say.
please.
That what I'm also realizing and sitting with is I used to always feel that I had to do things on my own. And this burden of being really independent and not needing to ask for help. Right. And I'm realizing, and I think there's a shift happening globally as well, right? That we're going from, especially coming from the US, where things are so isolated and nuclear. You know, we grew up in the States in a very nuclear unit, right? So it was your parents, you and your siblings, and that was it, right? Versus a culture perhaps in Europe and certain, especially in Southern Europe and also in Asia, where it was more about extended community and family. And so what I'm also realizing is that we're more powerful when we work together. And the possibilities are more expansive when we come to the table with our own different unique experience and expertise and knowledge. And so whatever that we're creating in this world, this new world, right, is not meant to be done alone. And it's meant to be done in collaboration with others. And so for me, collaboration, building community has been really critical in the work that I'm doing and in what I'm hoping to create. And I also think that that's something that I see a shift is happening, but it's really in, I think, the spaces that we want to create, the choices that we're making, how we decide to show up differently. And so I do think there is a bigger conversation around this idea of community, how to create it, how to find it, and how to make it, because humans at the end of the day are all about connection. We need connection, right? We also understand that living longer and having longevity in our lives, part of that is a huge aspect of that is your social environment,
Connection. Yeah.
right? Is connection. And so I think that we're seeing this more than ever, especially with all the mental things and anxiety and the depression that we're seeing in this world. So the work that I do, the work that you're doing to bring people together, to have these conversations and to hold these spaces is a part of that. So I do think that that's a bigger,
And
back of my mind topic.
yeah, no, I think it's a very powerful one. Because especially with AI, everything is so personalized, so individual. So suddenly we're kind of losing that. Even something as stupid as TV, right? Before you could go to school, we all watched the same show. All the girls watched the same thing and we could talk about it. And now everyone has their own subscription, everyone is watching their own thing. And I think sometimes Barcelona is a where we're both based, a very easy city to create that community. But what would you say to people that maybe feel a little bit less open to that or not seeing those spaces so much to create that community? How
Yeah.
would you, what would you tell them to do?
I mean, you have to make an effort. But what I would say to back to what you were sharing about being a little girl and watching the same TV shows, I would say that creating community and having adult friendships is very different than when you're younger. And Mel Robbins talks a lot about this, especially in her last book, Let Them. And I'm going to riff off of what she says in her book. But basically, when you're basically going to, you have everything kind of set up for you, right? So you're going to school every single day, Monday through Friday. You're seeing the same people, right? You're learning the same things. You're having quite similar activities, perhaps watching the same shows. You're in this really space that's been created and nurtured for you. And they always say, right, it takes, there's a study, and I can't remember who did the study, but there's a study that basically says you need 70 hours to spend 70 hours with someone for them to be called an acquaintance, 200 hours to be considered a friend. The thing is, when you're a child, 70 hours or even 200 hours is, 2 months maybe.
Yeah, easy.
And a lot of shared interest.
Mm.
But then what happens is you leave school, you go to university, or you go on your way and you move away from that. And all of a sudden you're on your own. You don't have that to go to. Then you have to figure out, how do I create and how do I form friendships that before were automatically just there.
Yeah.
Right. And so we wonder why adult friendships are so much more difficult, because we have to make that happen on our own. And then finding, people who have different interests, or sorry, similar interests and similar backgrounds and things like that takes time. And so back to your last question about how does that one make that happen? What I would say is it takes effort, right? As with everything, or anything. Sadly, we can't just sit in our home and just, expect people just to come knocking.
Hi, your neighbor.
Right? But the thing is about Barcelona, but even I imagine for lots of other places, there's different communities and groups. And because, and this is where there's an advantage of having social media and kind of resources now, is that, for example, Barcelona, you've got so many meetup groups, so many different Facebook groups. You've got different events happening all the time that I feel like you really, if you put yourself out there, you're able to find, connection. And then it starts from there, right? It takes time to build, and it doesn't always happen immediately. And sometimes when you live in a place that's very transient, that could change, right? And it's a part of the nature of things. But yeah, I mean, for example, I do a lot of talks at Backstory Bookstore, and they create all sorts of different events, and you can find something there for anybody really. And oftentimes I get people who have just moved to the city and they're showing up. And so I feel like if you look, you will find. There are so many different things. And one thing leads to the next. I found one of my closest friends from my neighbor downstairs, and then, you start to make those connections, and then people introduce you to others, and then it starts to really happen. But you have to take that first step.
I guess it's what you were saying in the beginning. It's from the inside out. And what would you say for someone that is starting their journey into having a relationship with money? Not even saying what kind, but just figuring out a relationship that they have one. What would you say would be the first steps to take?
Mhm. I would say that the first steps, and there's a lot of conscious work you can do around questioning, a lot of resources that are available online, right? Books that you can read, but that allow you to start to explore, what does money mean to me, right? You can even start with one word. And I often do this in my workshops, right? When I say the word money, what is the first word or emotion that comes to mind? Then start there, right? Start to explore why I might feel the emotion or the feeling that I feel. Where does that come from? Right. So I would say that's a great way to understand and start to explore those relationships, start to think about, what were the things you used to hear about money as a child? What were the emotions or feelings that you would even feel as a child around money? What were the things you heard or didn't hear? So those are the places for me that I would always encourage to start. Mhm.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I did that in one of your workshops. So,
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are the challenges you're facing today?
Mm.
And what are the things you used to hear? And is there even a correlation that you can start to explore?
And have you seen in your own journey, have you seen a shift in how you relate to money and how you feel connected to money?
Absolutely. And I would say it's still continuing to evolve, and it will continue to change and evolve, right? And because I have certain goals and aspirations that I want to be able to achieve so that I can be able to give back and make the impact that I want to in this world. But I would say probably the biggest thing for me, once I got over this kind of victim mentality of saying that I was subject to parents who didn't teach me, or who didn't, I wasn't taught, and I'm just going to stay stuck in that mindset. I think once I got past that and started to take the steps, I would say the biggest thing now is, yeah, understanding that money at the end of the day is a tool, right? And really thinking of it that way. So for me, I would say that's one thing I keep going back to is that what is my purpose? What am I trying to do? And how do I make my money work for me to make that happen? How do I also ask for my value in the work that I'm doing? Right. So I would say that that's a really important aspect. And I would also say that the more you start to get into understanding how to manage your money and how to view it, the more empowering it can be. Really understand, like, hey, where am I at? As hard as that might be, right? Because maybe you're not where you want to be. But if you understand where you are and where you want to go and what that gap is, you can start to make plans to work towards that, right?
Right.
One of the most empowering things I've ever done was actually work with a financial planner. And so I've done two now because the first one I did was a little bit too good to be true. And so I needed a second opinion. And I'm working with one now. And basically, what that looks like is, when you think of financial planning, you think, oh, it's just numbers. But that's actually just, it's not, it's your entire life in terms of what are your goals and aspirations? How do you get there? So I know, where I'm at financially, where I want to go, what the gap is. And we talk about everything to end of life, so you're talking about planning your life when it comes to the very last breath you take as it relates to where do I want my money to go? Am I create like I have a power of attorney, I have a trust, I have health medical directives, right? So that I know that by end of life, when I get to that point where I can't make decisions for me anymore, for myself anymore, I have people and I have everything, written down, that I can entrust the people that are responsible to help me execute that. So having done that and coming back and reviewing it every so often is really empowering. And it feels there's such a sense of security around that, you know,
Wow.
even though knowing that I'm not there yet, I still have, a gap to where I want to get to, but knowing where I'm at and checking in with myself every so often and holding myself accountable for that has been game changing.
Do you know right now already what the goal is? Because sometimes I feel like we have a vague idea of where we want to go, but a lot of times it's not that clear, right? A lot of times we just don't know yet. Okay, what is actually the goal? And I feel as maybe also the relationship with money might be evolving, that also our goals might evolve with them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe. Because otherwise it's sometimes, am I allowed to dream that big?
Mhm.
Is that even something that I would even consider? And then if you're maybe at another stage, you start considering completely different things. And maybe, I don't know, what would you say to that?
I would say start where you're at.
Okay.
Start with wherever you're at. I think sometimes we get overwhelmed, especially when I'm painting this picture, to be like, I don't know what that looks like. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. Because the thing is that goals are meant to change. Goals I find can be moving and pliable. Right. And so, for example, in my specific situation, my goals will for sure change. But what I've worked on is where I'm at today, right?
Right.
How much am I spending? What are my normal day to day expenses? Right. And then using that as the benchmark and the base and planning that out. And then if you want to add on, like, okay, I want to be able to invest in a business, I want to be able to invest in real estate, then you build that in.
Mm.
Right? But it's starting with wherever you're at. And so
Right.
understanding where am I at and what are my maybe short-term goals and then adding as that goes, right? But it doesn't have to be, I think oftentimes we put on these like really lofty ambitions and then we feel like, oh, it's way too far. I'm never going to get there. And then we just abandon it before we even start.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's great to have that in the back, but also to put in mini goals and mini, what would you say, like mini milestones or mileposts, right? So that that are more achievable
Yeah.
and that are more motivating to get to. So maybe it's just understanding where am I today
Right.
and where do I want to go in the next, like, before the end of the year?
Mm.
What is my goal for this year? And start there. I always say start where you're at.
Lovely. I love that. It takes away the pressure for sure. Just like, okay, let's start where we are.
Exactly.
And especially with all the change that is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes we feel already behind. I
Mm.
know that was my story for a really long time, and it still sometimes shows up. It doesn't completely ever go away, you know? And so we feel like there's always this idea of comparison, and also with social media, it's even harder these days, right? But it's understanding that our timeline is our own. We don't always see what is behind somebody else's story. And so it's understanding that our timeline is our own and we have to start with wherever we are.
Very interesting. Yeah. One of the last questions, since this podcast is called New World in the Making, how does a world in the making look like to you?
Well, my hope is
Mhm.
that I'm a part of this, right? New world in the making, that the work that I'm doing is really helping to shape shift this new world that we're evolving into. And what that looks like for me is really bringing this topic of money to the forefront and onto the table, right? Educating. It is my mission to really impact as many people as possible, specifically, not specifically, but majority, focused on women and women plus and marginalized communities, but everyone really, to invite us to have these conversations around money, for us to start that dialogue to understand what is that relationship look like? What are the beliefs that I inherited that I no longer need to hold on? What are the good things and start to feel empowered with making that money work for me, whatever that looks like, wherever you are. And so for me, that's really where it starts. And then, of course, as we go deeper into understanding what are those beliefs that shape the behavior. And so working on mindset, money blocks, but that's really what my mission in this for the rest of my life in this lifetime is meant to be, is really the more I see people having these conversations, it brings me so much joy to hold spaces and then to see people posting and sharing stories afterwards about them having conversations with their friends or their circles, right? And
Mhm.
it's this ripple effect and this wave that I want to start to create where I hope people become a lot more empowered when it comes to money and seeing money in a different way, that it really can be a tool for us to live our purpose and to do the things that we're meant to do in this world. So yeah.
Do you see that that is happening more and more? Do you see that we're all stepping more into that? Or what is that? What sensation, intuition do you have about the transition that we're in right now?
I feel it. I feel that we're making steps in the right direction, but we're still far away from this being really um, a more common thing, right?
Mm.
What I would say is it's really positive, like I had mentioned to you, to see so many, for example, women in this space now creating and educating, whether when it comes to books or podcasts, right? I'm connected with a woman who's about to launch a investment app in the US for Women Plus that I'm a part of, right? And also I'm connected with someone else in the Europe now who has created an investing school for women in the EU. So there's a lot of people in the spaces that I'm connecting to now. So there's change happening. And of course I would like to see it happen faster, but it will take some time. So
So in 5 to 10 years,
hmm.
where do you see that change leading us to?
I think we'll start to see this more and more. And it's interesting because we're talking about it, it's coming to mind, is that I'm also seeing this topic of money on a much bigger scale in general. A
Mm.
lot of It's interesting actually because a lot of people I follow who are either podcasts, speakers or authors in different spaces, they're all touching on this topic. Even astrologers are touching on this topic. And so it's actually, I have been noticing that as of recent. So I do think that we'll see, maybe this is a trend that's going to happen when we'll see more people, coming into this space to talk about money from different angles.
Yeah.
A lot of it has been more a mindset, which has been really interesting as well. And so the hope is that because I've been also starting to see that this will continue and this will start to just really open up the dialogue for more people. And for me, I see it not as competition, but as everyone helping me to elevate this awareness. Yeah. With people who have much bigger audiences than me, right? And so I think it's a really positive thing.
Very exciting moments to come. I am super grateful for this. Thank you so much.
Thank
Is
you.
there anything that you would like to add, that you would like to our listeners to stay with?
I just thank you so much for the opportunity and to have this discussion, this dialogue is, I think, hopefully one of the first to come. But I think this topic is really important. And I just invite everyone who haven't already explored what the relationship looks like with money to think about what that is and how you behave with it, how you view it, how you manage it, and start to explore perhaps some of the connections that you made early on as a child that might relate to you as an adult now and why you behave the way you behave. Yeah. And just start with questioning what that is and doing it from a place of just compassion and openness and curiosity and not feeling because we're already hard on ourselves as it is. We're hard enough on ourselves, you know? So just being curious and compassionate towards yourself to understand, like, why is it that way? And it's never too late. I'm not behind.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. This
Thank
was
you.
incredible.
Thank you so much.
Please support this podcast by subscribing. The more subscribers we have, the more we can grow and reach more people.